some kind of a imaginary environment. And sitting over here in this environment is Imam Abu Hanifa, radiallahu anhu. He's reclining under a tree, and he's got his prayer beads in his hand, and he's got his book of jurisprudence in his hand. And he says, society needs laws. Reason must serve God. But rules must preserve the dignity of creation. He perhaps plays with his beard as he says this. And then perhaps over here, Imam al-Ghazali looks at him, and his face gets a little worried. And he nods, and then he says, yes, but law without spirit is lifeless. I looked for the truth, Imam al-Ghazali says. I looked in kalam, I looked in words, but I found it in my heart. And so as Imam al-Ghazali has said this, Imam Abu Hanifa is interpreting what he has said. Over here, on the other side of the room, Ibn Arabi leaps up. Ibn Arabi leaps up and he says, law and spirit, law and spirit. But what you don't see is that it's all one. It's everything. It's unity in all. And then over there, this man gets up and he starts twirling and dancing. And of course, it's Maulana Rumi. And he smiles and he says, I saw many truths in books, but nowhere did I see it as deeply as I found it in the flute when the sound came out, when it was crying, being separated from the tree. And hearing all of this, this other man comes up, comes running into the middle, wearing a simple sherwani, and has a book of Farsi poetry in his hand, and maybe a German dictionary in his right hand. And he looks at all of them and he says, masters, I have walked under your shadows, and I have written in your light. However, we live in a time when the ummah is asleep. But the Quran, it is not a book of the past. Structure, inner revival, unity through duplicity and multiplicity. Ignited love, yes. But we must rise up. We must shape our own destiny. And then he recites the verse of the Quran. God doesn't change a people's condition until they change what is in their own hearts. The garden gets very quiet. A tree bows down, and everyone sort of nods and listens. And then maybe a hawk comes flying through the gathering. And Iqbal says, Tu shahi hai, parwaz hai kaam tera, tere samne asma aur bhi hai. If you're a young person sitting here, you're probably thinking to yourself, how did I get dragged here? And who is this guy, Iqbal? How many people here have the name Iqbal either in their first, middle, or last name? Anyone here, Iqbal? If we have a few, it's probably one of the most common names in the entire, Muslim world. We were discussing this. If you think about, we like to say Indonesia is the most populous Muslim country, 100 and 200 million. But if you add up the population of Pakistan, of India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the surrounding areas, you're almost at 500 million people. That's half the ummah. Yet, there's one person that emerges from the shadows of that 500 million people, that's Iqbal. And his legacy, we live today. We hear it in Sufi songs. We hear it when politicians want to argue with one another and make a point. We hear it when a mother or a father wants to make a point about how terrible their children are. We hear it when a lover is trying to convince his beloved, but it's there, right there behind us in the periphery. So our goal today is to not introduce Iqbal through the old ages and the old sages, but through the voice and essence of a young man who's perhaps no more than in his late 20s, early 30s, who is just like you and me, but has grasped this tradition and taken a hold of it and claimed it. And our hope today is that each and every single one of you leaves having learned something about the legacy of this unbelievable saint, this giant of our time. Born in 1877, I was born in 1977, just 100 years before I walked on this earth, this giant was alive. Who was this man? What were the surrounding conflicts of his time? What were the ideas of his time? And why is it that today, we'll show you a picture that you can go to a place in Germany and there's a little plaque that says, Muhammad Iqbal lived here. Why is this man so important and so critical for our history? So with that, I'd like to introduce Saleh Basir. Saleh is there's a lot to say about Saleh, but I'll say it in my own way without reading a boring bio. As you can see, he's quite young. And you might perhaps that's an advantage when you're encountering something as prolific as Iqbal. He has studied at Dar al-Nizami in South Africa. He is a mufti by training. He had a BA in history from Columbia, and he's a doctoral candidate at Harvard, among many, many other qualities that he has. And today, Saleh is going to start by reciting some poetry for us in Farsi. He speaks 6 languages, in Farsi and in Urdu. And he's going to share with us some of his thoughts. And then we're going to have a nice discussion about the legacy of Iqbal and the moment and the things that Iqbal has left behind that we are the inheritors of. So Saleh, without further ado, but over to you.
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa. ولا أمة بعد أمته ولا كتاب بعد كتابه ولا شريعة بعد شريعته ولا صحابة بعد صحابته أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم وقال النبي العربي الهاشمي عليه أفضل الصلوات وأكمل التحيات وأزكى المباركات وإن من الشعر لحكمة أو كما قال صلى الله تعالى عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. Thank you so much, Risala, for having me. Thank you, Rehan. Thank you, Farouk. And thank you, Ahmed, for flying out from Los Angeles for this event. Very grateful to the whole community for having me here. If it's okay, I wanted sort of an Iqbalian spirit. I wanted to recite some couplets of all the great Persian masters of the tradition. So I want to start off with Maulana Rumi and go until Iqbal. So it's about 700 years, and I'll recite a couplet from the major poets. And just for geographical understanding, Maulana Rumi is in Konya, Hafiz Shirazi is in Iran, Saadi Shirazi is in Iran, Mirza Ghalib is obviously in Delhi, Naziri Nishapuri, he's at the Mughal court of Akbar, comes from Nishapur, he comes to Hindustan, dies in Surat, he's buried in Gujarat in India, incredible poet. Iqbal said he would trade the whole philosophy of Hegel for one line of Naziri. But especially these 3, which are Maulana Rumi, Mirza Ghalib al-Dihlawi, and Muhammad Iqbal. And without further ado, I'll just recite the Persian. We obviously can't translate all of it, but I want, in the way that Iqbal would have wanted everyone to see him at the end, in the way that he is Khatam al-Shu'ara. You know, I think there's no doubt there is nobody after him. I think we have seen many poets. I mean, there are many brilliant poets like Joan Elia and, you know, Khumar Brankravi and Josh Mali Abadi and Jigar Murad Abadi and many others that we don't have time to get into, you know, Majrooh Sultanpuri and others. But Iqbal is really the last poet who is part of the classical tradition. So without further ado, وبقول حضرت مولانا جلال الدین بلخی رومی شکر کند چرخ فلک از ملک و ملک و ملک که از کرم بخشش او روشن بخشنده شدم باز چو شطرنج روان خاموش و خود جمله زبان که از رخ آن شاه جهان فرخ فرخنده شدم هر نفس آواز عشق میرسد از چپ و راست ما به فلک بوده ایم یار ملک بوده ایم باز همانجا رویم که آن شهر ماست و به قول حضرت خواجه حافظ شیرازی دل می رود ز دستم صاحب دلان خدا را دردا که راز پنهان خواهد شد آشکارا کشتی شکستگانیم ای باد شرط برخیز باشد که باز بینیم دیدار آشنا را حافظ به خود نپوشید این خرقه می آلود حافظ به خود نپوشید این خرقه می آلود ای شیخ پاک دامن معذور دار ما را و به قول حضرت فوغان و به قول حضرت سعدی شیرازی سعدی فغان از دست ما لائق نبود ای بی وفا سعدی فغان از دست ما لائق نبود ای بی وفا طاقت نمی آرم جفاکار از فغانم می رود و به قول حضرت نظیری نیشاپوری بنیم اشوا مسیح از فلک به زیر آور بنیم اشوا مسیح از فلک به زیر آور تو باش ساقی و جام از کف سکندر کش و به قول دیگر از نظیری طبل درویشی ما بر جاوید زدن بر لب بام بخیز نوبت لب بام بجز نوبت سلطانی نیست و به قول دیگر هر کس گریزد از صف ما مرد غوغا نیست هر کس گریزد از صف ما مرد غوغا نیست هر مرد که کشته نشود از قبیله ایمان نیست. I just want to translate the Iqbal. He said this was his favorite line in all of Persian poetry. He said that any man who fled from the battlefield was never from our tribe. Any person who was never killed was never from our ummah. Later on, we'll go to the great Ghalib. وبقول حضرت مرزا أسد الله خان غالب الدهلوي نعش غالب همچنین بر جا گذار آخر شب است. نعش غالب همچنین بر جا گذار آخر شب است. خیز و در کهلی پرند گوهر آمایش مپیش. و به قول دیگر نرنجم گر بصورت از گدایان بودم غالب. نرنجم گر بصورت از گدایان بودم غالب. به دارالملک معنا می کنم فرمان روایی ها. I'll translate this. He says that, oh Ghalib, I am not sad or I don't have anxiety if I'm a beggar in this world. For بدار الملك معنا, for in the kingdom of meaning, I am a king. May kunam farman ravai ha. I command orders in that world. وبقول دیگر بلبل با درخت گل گوید چیز در دلت این دم در بیان بنه نیست کسی توی و ما. وبقول حضرت خلندر لاهوری خواجه لاهوری امام عاشقان دردمند امام عاشقان رسول عربی حضرت محمد اقبال. اقبال به منبر زد رازی که نباید گفت. اقبال به منبر زد رازی که نباید گفت. ناپخته بیرون آمد از جلوت میخانه. هر کسی نگه دارد هر کس سخنی دارد. در بزم تو میخیزد افسانه ز افسانه. این کیست که بر دلها آورده شب خونی. صد شهر تمنا را یغمه زده ترکانا. در دشت جنون من جبریل زبون سیدی. یزدان به کمند آور ای همت مردانا. و به قول دیگر بیا اقبال جامی از خمستانی خودی در کش. بیا اقبال جامی از خمستانی خودی در کش که تو از میخانه مغرب ز خود بیگانه می آیی. Which means that, oh Iqbal, come and take a sip from your own khudi, from your own self. که تو از میخانه مغرب ز خود بیگانه می آیی. For you have left a stranger unto yourself after leaving Europe. کی حق, sorry, last, just want to do some Urdu. کی حق سے فرشتوں نے اقبال کی غمازی. کی حق سے فرشتوں نے اقبال کی غمازی. گستاخ کرتا ہے فطرت کی ہنا بندی. خاکی ہے مگر اس کی انداز ہے افلاکی. رومی ہے نشامی ہے کاشی نہ سمرقندی. سکھلائے فرشتوں کو آدم کی طرف اس نے. آدم کو سکھاتا ہے آداب خداوندی. And finally, obviously, کیوں ضیاءکار بنوں سود فراموش رہوں. فکر فردا نہ کرو محو غم دوش رہوں. Then نالہ بلبل نہ رہوں ہمتن گورش ہوں. ہم نوا میں بھی کوئی گل ہوں کہ خاموش رہوں. جرأت آموز میری تاب سخن ہے مجھ کو. شکوہ اللہ سے خاکم بدہن ہے مجھ کو. Then دل سے جو بات نکلتی ہے اثر رکھتی ہے. پر نہیں طاقت پرواز مگر رکھتی ہے. قدسی الاصل ہے رفت پہ نظر رکھتی ہے. خاک سے اٹھتی ہے گردوں پہ گزر رکھتی ہے. And then obviously کہ محمد سے وفا تو نے تو ہم تیرے ہیں صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم. but before that شور ہو گئی کہ دنیا سے مسلمان نابود. ہم یہی کہتے ہیں کہ تھے کہیں مسلم موجود. تم مزاح میں نصارا اور تم تمدن میں ہنود. کیا یہی مسلمان ہیں جنہیں دیکھ کر شرمائیں یہود. یوں تو سید بھی ہو مرزا بھی ہو افغان بھی ہو سب بھی کچھ ہو بتاؤ کہ مسلمان بھی ہو. ہر کوئی مست میں ذوق تن آسانی ہے. تم مسلمان ہو کیا یہ انداز مسلمانی ہے. نہ حیدر فقر ہے نہ دولت عثمانی ہے. کیا یہی Sorry. And then I forget the next line, but that's okay. Inshallah, we'll stop there. But anyways, I just wanted to give you just a taste of the whole. We can do another event. We can. I just wanted to show you the breadth of the whole canon. Gahi khandam, gahi uftam, gahi khayzam. Anyways, but yeah. Jazakallah khair. Let's continue.
Let's continue. So, I think you wanted to share some thoughts about Iqbal first. So why don't we dig into that a little bit?
Yeah. Absolutely. Why don't you just share a 30-second reflection and then I'll continue. It's a lot of words from me at this moment. Yeah. Let me shift back into English.
Or for some of the people here who are perhaps trying to consume what has just been shared, there is a very famous poem of Iqbal, a series of poems. I was discussing this with you. Of course, it's called Shikwa Jawab Shikwa, the complaint and then the answer to the complaint. Before we get into maybe the details of that poem and its impact to this day, I'm going to ask you to paint a picture of who Iqbal was and what was the environment that he was born in 1877? After the mutiny, it happens in 1851 in India, or 1857, the First War of Independence as it's known. The Delhi Sultanate has been destroyed. The Muslims are really retreating, like what happened in Spain and perhaps 7/11. It's finding itself happening again in South Asia this time, and this man is born, and he inherits from Bahadur Shah Zafar and the poets of his time. What kind of an environment is he born into?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite pictures of him. This is him getting an honorary doctorate from Aligarh in the year 1932. He's sort of dressed in his robes, but really incredible picture. So obviously we know the Muslims had ruled Delhi from the time that Mahmud Ghaznavi had come in for about 700 years. So this is an incredible painting that was pictured, that was drawn by the Lucknow school in 1755 of all the Mughal emperors, but starting from Taimur. So you have Taimur, and then you have on the right side, you have all of his descendants, and the left side, so Babur, all the way until Shah Alam Sani II, who died in 1802. So this is kind of the Muslim intellectual environment. Obviously, I just want to show the statistic. Before Babur conquered South Asia, Muslims were about 4%. And this is South Asia, from Peshawar to Dhaka to Madras and Hyderabad in the south. By the time of partition, Muslims were about 42%. Imagine that. So from Babur until Bahadur Shah Zafar, Muslims go from 5% to about 42%. And this is absolutely wild, because before Babur, Muslims were ruling India for 400 years. So there's something incredibly unique, incredibly singular about the Mughal dynasty. I did my master's on the Mughal dynasty. I don't study them anymore, but I was really fascinated by this dynasty. Obviously I come from the city of Hyderabad, which the Nizam's the first vizier was an incredibly close vizier of the great Alamgir Aurangzeb, and entrusted in many ways the dynasty. And the first Nizam was so loyal to Aurangzeb that when Ahmad Shah Abdari comes, he tells Nizam al-Mulk Asif Jah min Qamruddin Khan to enter the takht, which is the throne. And he says that I have given bay'ah to Aurangzeb that I would always be a vizier and never a Badshah. And he continues that. And in fact, he's buried right next to Aurangzeb in Aurangabad. Obviously, very emotional, but the grave is very close to being burned alive, and it's an incredible moment. But anyways, this is the Mughal Empire at its height. Obviously, this is pretty much it's all of South Asia. Actually, all of South Asia never come under any single dynasty, not under Ashoka, any of the older Indian kings, but under Aurangzeb, South Asia sort of becomes a singular entity, which is incredible. 60 years after Aurangzeb's death, you have sort of split. So you have the two major Muslim powers in the south, which is Hyderabad, obviously, and the second, can anybody guess? Mysore, which is Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. So Aurangzeb spends 30 years in the Deccan conquering, and he leaves two dynasties that stay up until the 19th century, which is incredible. And Tipu Sultan will be killed by the same general who defeats George Washington, who is Lord Cornwallis. Defeats him in the Battle of Yorktown, right? Yorktown, and then he will come and kill Tipu Sultan in 1799, which is crazy. This is an incredible moment. This is Aurangzeb's great-grandson, Shah Alam II, gives a divan to Lord Robert Clive in 1765. It's an incredible moment. This is the sort of the romantic period of painting, between Impressionist and romantic period of painting, 18th century. He's handing the divan. I mean, this is a singular moment in في تاريخ الإسلام وحتى في تاريخ البشر that we can say. I just want you guys to see this. This is a picture of the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar. Can anybody say the famous line that's ascribed to him? Kitna bad Zafar, then biznamin koi yaar mein. How he says that, how bad nasib, how unfortunate is his nasib, literally his allotment from taqdeer, right? That his great-great-grandfather built a Taj Mahal, probably the wealthiest dynasty in Muslim history. I mean, the Abbasid Empire is maybe 1/10 of the GDP of the Mughal Empire. I mean, just the amount of wealth that is located, that Muslims are cultivating within South Asia and that are circulating within South Asia is unprecedented, right? Sunni Hanafi dynasty. And to see him, I mean, you just think about the ayah on the 4th page of Surah Ali Imran. قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ تُؤْتِ الْمُلْكَ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُعِزُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُذِلُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ بِيَدِكَ الْخَيْرِ إِنَّكَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. But that doesn't mean that we can't mourn this. I mean, it's a heartbreaking sight. Obviously for Muslims, 600 years, it's the dynasty and the takht and the hukumat and the sultana and the mamlaka is all coming to an end in this picture, which is incredible, right? That's his hookah there. I don't know if anybody can see it. But this was in Rangoon in 1865. And obviously 11 years later, Iqbal is born. And you have to think about, again, India is inheriting obviously Islamic Arab culture, Persian culture, Turkish culture, and the local Indian Sanskrit culture. So South Asians are heir to all of these tahzeebs. This is also a picture of him and the British Governor General at the time when he's captured. I mean, it's a very, very sad story. I wrote an essay called The Death of Urdu in America. I spoke a lot about it, that you can find it online if you look for it. I did want to speak about just, before we start, sorry, Iqbal, I should say, obviously coming from the Delhi and Lucknow school, which is so crazy to think about. We never think about the fact that obviously the mainstays of Urdu poetry in the 19th century, the three major poets obviously are Ghalib, Hakim Mu'min Khan, and Dagh Dehlavi. Dagh Dehlavi is buried in Hyderabad in the Yusufain Dargah, if anybody knows it, in Hyderabad. Obviously, Ghalib is in Delhi, and Hakim Khan Mu'min is buried in the Shah Waliullah Dargah in Delhi. And so these are three centers. So Delhi, Lucknow, and Hyderabad for Urdu poetry. So the fact that the greatest Urdu poet of the 20th century comes from Sialkot, nobody could have ever imagined. Not only the last Urdu poet, the last classical Persian poet. Forget about South Asia, because in Afghanistan, in Samarkand, and in Iran, they all depart from the classical model of the ghazal and the qasida. They all go into free verse from the French models of Baudelaire and others. And so Iqbal is the last ghazalist in Persian poetry. So Iran, Afghanistan, Samarkand, Bukhara, Herat, Mazar-e-Sharif, Waghaira, but also Delhi, Lucknow, Hyderabad. The fact that Iqbal is going to come from Punjab is just, you think about the ayah, Allahu yakhtassu bi rahmatihi man yasha. This is that. But I want to say one particular poet that had tremendous influence that is not talked about enough is Mir Anis, who was a Lucknowi Hyderabadi poet, but he was a Shi'i poet. And he wrote a Marsiyah for Imam Hussein alayhi salam, obviously the very tragic massacre that we all live with of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And it was, it's incredible Marsiyah, and it's a new genre of poetry. But Iqbal, especially for his Shikwa, is gonna be inspired sort of by this poet. These are his parents. I don't know if anybody knew this, but his father was actually he was a fabric maker of hijabs. So think about the proto-vela, hijab maker was his father, was just used to make the fabrics for hijab. That's his mother, I forget her name, Bibi Begum, born in 1877. Obviously, he's from Kashmir. His grandfather escaped Kashmir when the Hindu Rajas take over. He has that very famous line where he says, "Tanam bakhayaban jannat Kashmir, dalam az haram Hijaz, that's one of Shiraz." That my body is from the paradise avenues of Kashmir, my heart is from the Haram in Mecca, but my song is from Shiraz, i.e. in Iran. He is born in 1877. His father, incredibly, and we jazahullahu ahsan al-jazaa for doing this, he makes sure that he sends him to a local maktab to study Arabic and Persian at the age of 5 to 8. And this is something that is truly incredible, especially in South Asia. The mastery of the average Muslim from Lahore to Hyderabad in Arabic and Persian was unmatched. There is more, in fact, that we have studies that there is more Persian books written just in the city of Hyderabad from 1700s to the 1900s than all of Iran. Can you believe that? Forget about Delhi and Lucknow and Lahore, just in the city of Hyderabad. And all those books are still there, unpublished. But this is incredible, that maktab system was that he had the last sort of, before the British and the Anglican schools and the sort of uproot the Muslim educational system. Iqbal is the last beneficiary of that, where he gets an incredibly breathless education in Persian. Where obviously we know that his Persian is good because Iran teaches him. We know that. We know that Ali Shariati, who was the ideologue of the Islamic Revolution in 1976, will give a lecture in the University of Tehran on Farhang Namai as Iqbal Shanasi, or as Afkar Inqilabi as Iqbal, the revolutionary, because nobody had ever seen a revolutionary poet in Persian. The Persian poet is the lamentful, the ghazal, who's seeking the mahbub and the ma'shuq. But for someone, I met this Afghan uncle born in 1945, so randomly, and he said in 1978, the Saur Revolution happens, where Zahir Shah, the king, is overthrown for his cousin Dawood Khan. I'm sure many of you were alive. But they said at that time, so the three major poets, in Afghanistan that were revered are Maulana Rumi, obviously, Mirza Abdul Qadir Bidil Dehlawi, and Muhammad Iqbal. But they said that because Maulana Rumi was, kind of more into Sufism and mysticism, but because he said Iqbal as Hamasi Bood, that he had that passion. And he quoted this line of Iqbal where Iqbal said, I mean, it's just incredible how it all comes together. He said, he quoted it, he said in 1975, on the podium of the University of Kabul, Kabul University, they were all singing this line to a bunch of Afghan leftists. Afghan leftists were singing this Ruba'i poem of Muhammad Iqbal, where he said, Musalman faqamas wa janda poshas, that Muslims are in teetered rags, just patch garment rags. Zakaras Jibra'il andar kharoshas. Jibreel is weeping at the condition of the Muslims. Biya naqsh digar millat berazim ka in millat jahan ra bar doshas. That come, let us sketch a new image of the ummah, because this current ummah is a burden on the shoulders of the world. And that idea of it resonated. It resonated incredibly to Afghan leftists. I mean, you can imagine. And that idea of kuntum khayra ummah ukhrijat linnas ta'muruna bil ma'rufi wa tanhuna 'anil munkar. This is not about, what is your kurta size or anything, but that can you make Islam speak to everyone? And that Iqbal is recited in the Shi'i commemorations of Imam Hussein. He's recited in the Salafi gatherings in Pakistan, the Salafi masjid. Obviously recited in the Deoband and Brelvi communities.
So keep us going. We're going to lose time with you. It was going to feel like an hour went by in 5 minutes.
Sure.
So
I'm sorry.
What happens next? Keep us going.
Yeah. Man,
So he's growing up in this environment. You're describing the classical training he has. How does he end up? We're seeing he's immersed in the ulums. He's surrounded by Urdu poetry everywhere.
Right.
How does he go to Cambridge of all places?
Right. And I think this is incredible, right? Because you have 400 million Muslims in South Asia at that time, and I think with Iqbal, because he's trained in the Islamic tradition, he realizes that Muslims have to create dialogue with the new knowledge, and that Muslims from the 8th century have always been open-minded to knowledge, but with confidence, right? So you can think about the 6 great Muslim thinkers in the world, right? Abu Nasr al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, Abu al-Walid ibn Rushd al-Hafid, and obviously Ibn Arabi, and finally Shah Waliullah Muhaddis al-Dehlawi. These are the 7, really major thinkers. So Iqbal, he goes to government college in Lahore, majors in philosophy, and he does so well that Thomas Arnold sends him to Cambridge on a scholarship. And as far as I know, he is the first Muslim to go to Cambridge. Not the first South Asian Muslim, but the first Muslim from Morocco to Malaysia. And obviously Allah chooses whomsoever he wills. And this is incredible that he goes, he doesn't study medicine, he doesn't study engineering, respectfully, but he goes and he studies law. And as far as I know, he's the first the first Muslim JD PhD, the first Muslim lawyer who's also a philosopher. We don't, and so that idea that he's very interested, that Muslims have to respond. Muslims are obviously, I should also say this, all Muslim countries are colonized besides 3. I don't know if anybody can name them. Turkey. No, Indonesia is by the Dutch.
Yes.
Iran, Afghanistan. These 3. Everywhere else, Malaysia, Indonesia, Ivory Coast, not Ethiopia, Sudan, obviously, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Sultanate of Brunei, Malaysia. I mean, it's all Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. All of it is gone. Eastern Europe, Albania, Bosnia are obviously taken by the Austrian Empire. All of that is gone, and so now he is going to England as 20 Muslims who are living in the colonial metropole, and he's going there, and but thank God his father sent him to a maktab, and he had a tradition with him, because many thousands of Muslims have gone to Oxford in the 20th century and have achieved very little. And I think that because he was trained by his father and given the breadth of the Islamic tradition, and maybe we can talk about this later, but again, I want to give you guys that what Iqbal is equipped with. Iqbal has to be a master not only of the Kalam tradition, so people like Taftazani and Ghazali, so that's the Islamic theological tradition. He has to be a master of the philosophy tradition, so people like Ibn Sina, Farabi, Ibn Sina, Farabi, Ibn Rushd, Averroes, Ibn Tufail, Ibn Yaqzan, and others. He has to be equipped in the Islamic mystical tradition, so Suharwardi, Hallaj, Ibn Arabi, obviously Mirza Abdul Qadir Bidil, Nasr Khusro, and others. He also has to be equipped in the Persian canon, so Maulana Rumi, Hafiz, Sa'di, all of them. And then he has to be equipped, in the Western philosophical tradition, right? So Hegel, Kant, Marx, Nietzsche, and others. David Hume, John Locke, Francis Bacon, and all of these people. And he has to sit there as this Punjabi Muslim guy in London and do something. Because what he's realizing is that we can't just repeat stuff over and over again, right? That we have to ask new questions. We have to be in dialogue. We have to create something new. And that there's, one of his favorite verses in the Quran is in Surah Rahman, which is, كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. This is the verse in Surah Rahman, where Allah Ta'ala, every day He is in a new matter. We don't have time to get into this. But also, Iqbal has to be a master of Ash'ari thought and Maturidi thought and all of this stuff. And the Maulana in the madrasa, you were talking about this, is only well-versed in hadith, fiqh, tafsir, and the Ash'ari tradition. And also, and the last thing is history. That he has to be familiar with all of Islamic history. Actually, in the Harvard Library, we have a singular copy of a book that Iqbal edited during his PhD on Seljuk history. It's a 400-page tome of Seljuk history. So that line in Shikwa when he says, Seljuk bi Turani bi, he spent 2 years editing a manuscript called Rawdat al-Jinan fi Tarikhi Seljukiyan. You can find it on the history of the Seljuks. It was a Persian copy that he edited. So now he has to do all of these things because now the Maulanas are only to do, they have their place of keeping Muslims in the place. But, Iqbal wants to ask new questions. And that, what does, what would Islam look like in a new world?
When he's emerging and becoming who we know he becomes.
Yeah.
He's seeing the decline of, European colonialism. He's seen World War I. He's going back to South Asia. He's seeing the plight of the Muslims losing the seat of power. The Khilafah is ending in Ottoman Turkey. What are the things that he's wrestling with geopolitically as he's coming to terms with being a Muslim in that time?
Yeah, I think obviously we all know, the Ottoman Khilafat ending, 600-year empire, perhaps one of the longest empires in human history, if not the longest. Obviously, there's Hindu-Muslims tensions. I always ask this question that why did Muslim India produce Iqbal and not Morocco and not Tunisia and not Egypt and not Syria and not Iraq and not Turkey and not Malaysia and not West Africa and not Uzbekistan and not Kyrgyzstan? And I think that the answer is, and maybe you guys can correct me, was because Iqbal knew that Muslims would never rule Delhi again. And that when the French were in Syria, the Muslims knew that they were going to rule Damascus again. When the Muslims were in Iraq, they knew that they were going to get Baghdad and they were going to get Egypt back and they were going to get Morocco back. But just like Spain, it's a very similar thing. In fact, in 710 AD, Walid ibn Abdul Malik, the Umayyad king, sends 3 generals. Tariq ibn Ziyad will take Spain in June 710. Muhammad ibn Qasim will take Sindh in September 710. And Muslim ibn Qaid will take Samarkand in 711 AD. In 1 year, these three major capitals. And I think there's this mirrored fate, I think, between Spain and Muslim India. I think for sure there's an incredible, in fact, I don't know if anybody knows, the first time Ibn Rushd was printed in Arabic was in Hyderabad, and also Ibn Arabi as well. Both Ibn Arabi and Ibn Rushd.
Can you comment on that a little bit? Because I think that's such an interesting point that when he went there, because he went there. And
the first Muslim to go since the exile, since Christopher Columbus stood there at the gates in 1492, the first Muslim to go was a Muslim Punjabi and pray. And we have a photograph of him praying inside the masjid. I should have put it on the slides, but yeah.
What is he saying in his poems?
He, it's I don't know if I have a slide here, but I think he's using his knowledge of Islamic history. He's obviously, the Mughals didn't really know who the Muslim Spaniards were. They were so totally opposite side of the world. But because he's in Cambridge, he has access to new manuscripts like Ibn Khaldun. As far as I know, he's the first Muslim South Asian to read Ibn Khaldun. Because Ibn Khaldun was his Muqaddimah never came to India. But because Iqbal can go to Cambridge, he has this eagle's eye view of the whole tradition of Islam. All 22 branches of Islam. And the reason why people called him an allama was because in modernity, the Maulana had lost that role of being someone who had universal knowledge of the tradition. Iqbal is now coming as a philosopher, as a hakim, as a mu'arrikh, as a historian, as a poet, but also as a theologian.
One thing I want to ask you is, so he goes from Cordoba. The one place that really touches him is Germany, and he gets a lot out of that experience. What does he encounter in the German philosophical tradition, which for most of us who are not philosophers, it seems very thick, very dense, and almost inaccessible in a lot of ways. Yet he grapples with it, and he almost destroys it in his own way. Not in a negative way, but he deconstructs it. So what did he gain out of that experience? Because the German experience is a little different than the British experience or any of the other colonizing powers, because that was a power on the ascent. So just how do you explain that? That was peak civilization.
I think it just shows that he kind of كان قرأ وقته, that he read his moment, and in the sense of that Germany is the house of philosophy. I mean, the three major philosophers of the West are who? Kant, Hegel, and Nietzsche. And he can stay in England. I mean, David Hume and John Locke, I mean, these are more political philosophers than real metaphysical philosophers. But I think he understands when he goes from Cambridge that there is, I mean, this is the true Beitul Hikmah of Europe is Germany. And he has to go, and not only does he have to learn English when he's in high school, you know, Sialkot, I went to the school, the Anglican school in Sialkot, but he has to go and now learn another language, which is German, which is the hardest European language to learn. It's such a difficult language. And he goes and he actually takes his oral exams in Munich, in Germany, and he becomes familiar with the most challenging philosophers of the West since Aristotle. I mean, Kant really remakes Aristotle, and he becomes and he's also the first Muslim to study in Germany. So again, he has to keep mastering new domains of knowledge. As every 4 years, it's like, wait, there's a whole new, you know, and then obviously comes back and yeah.
So he comes back to South Asia when? Around the 1920s?
1908.
So, you know, why does he decide to use poetry as his main means of expression? Because he could have been writing, and I'm sure he wrote great treatises and books, but why poetry? Who was he talking to in those poems?
I think, I mean, I don't know how much time we have, but I mean, this is like an hour and a half long answer. Obviously, the literary tradition of South Asia is incredible. I mean, we wrote more Persian poetry than, as I said, all of Iran. I think there's also much to say about the amount of Arabic poetry that comes out of India during this time. But I think more than anything, he understood that if Muslims were going to respond, the highest medium of philosophy within South Asia was in poetry. That if you look at someone like Mirza Abdul Qadir Bidil, he was the most 18th century Mughal poet, but that most of our philosophy was in poetry, because obviously Maulana Rumi didn't write prose. And he is one of the most commentated and the most celebrated philosophers of the Ummah. And the amount of the Raz and the Asrar in each bayt and each misra' of the Masnavi was so, I think, shocking to Iqbal that I think he understood that Islam was a language of ishara, of allusion, and that in poetry, that especially the South Asian poets had accomplished this to an unmatched degree. And that I think he saw that if he was going to create a philosophical project, it was going to be done in poetry to make sure that he was in continuity with all of these poets that I recited to you, but especially Maulana Rumi and Mirza Ghalib.
So when he comes back, if you think about the waves in the Muslim world at the time, you know, there's obviously the big Salafi wave coming through the Arabian Hijaz. There's this tendency towards atheism in the Ottoman Empire, the destruction of the Caliphate, and then there's this freedom movement taking birth in South Asia. And then there's Hassan al-Banna, and there's all these other things happening in Egypt with the Muslim Brotherhood. How does he adopt his worldview and his perspective about what the Muslims of South Asia should do? What's their destiny?
I mean, I think especially what's so brilliant about Iqbal was that he was never a consumer of thought. He always added something new. And for him, the political fate was always tied to the intellectual fate. And I think in his role as a politician, as a lawyer, as a philosopher, as a theologian, and most importantly, as a poet, he understood that Muslims could not achieve anything politically unless there was an intellectual vision and a falsafi nazariya underlying it, a philosophical vision underlying it. And that in any given empire, the Umayyad, the Abbasid, the Mamluk, the Ottoman, the Timuriya, the Safavids, there was always a Muslim philosopher that preceded them. Whether it was Juwayni and the Seljuks, Ibn Arabi and the Mamluks, and then obviously the Ottomans, Shah Waliullah, and then the later dynasties, Abdul Haq Dehlawi and the Mughals, and all of these things. I think for Iqbal, he understood that unless Muslims have a vision that is connected to their tradition, but is in dialogue with others, because when you read Imam Ghazali, Imam Ghazali is an Aristotelian. For sure, he's an Aristotelian. Ibn Arabi is drawing on different traditions, but he's adding something new. And that Iqbal knew that there was no retreat. There was no retreat into the tradition.
Tell us a little bit about his major works then. Banga Jibreel, the obviously Shikwa Jawab Shikwa we're going to get into. But how does he start putting these together, and share some insights?
So his first published work is Asrar Khudi. So his first published book is a Persian poem written the same Masnavi, the same meter as the Masnavi Maulana Rumi, and it's a philosophical work. He's asking questions. He's critiquing the Muslim condition in the 20th century for being a little bit too in the cloud. So he doesn't like Plato. He likes Socrates a little bit more. And he wants sort of Muslims to reshift their philosophical alignments. His next sort of major work is should be Rumuz Bekhudi and then Zaburi Ajam. His Urdu works actually come a lot later. He does have individual poems. Shikwa Jawab Shikwa he sings in 1912, 1913 on the occasion of when the Ottomans lose Eastern Europe. And that was the first time and since Tariq al-Maziyah took Spain in 17 AD where Muslims no longer had any European possessions. So from 17 AD to 1912. It's the first time Muslims never had any European possession whatsoever. And on that occasion, Iqbal writes, obviously, the Shikwa, right? Agar hum wafadar nahi, tu bhi dildar nahi. That is that sort of line of reflecting on that. How could Allah allow this to happen?
You want to get into Shikwa Jawab Shikwa a little bit? I mean, I think I could just read some poems. I just would rather you just talk about them. But I would love for some people here, especially those who are not familiar with. Who here has heard of Shikwa Jawab Shikwa? I mean, a lot of South Asians and older, but young people don't know. Tell us, what is a Shikwa? What is the meaning of the word Shikwa? And why did he write it? And then he recites something different, a response to that a few years later. Tell us just a little bit more about that, especially for someone who's never heard of it before.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously he's feeling a lot of emotion, but he's reworking the nazam. He's reworking the genre. He wants to again add something new. Usually the ghazal is something that is sort of ambiguous. You don't know who the beloved is. Is it God? Is it a human being? Whatever. He addresses it to God, but the ashiq is not some aimless avara lover. It's the ummah. The ashiq is now just the Muslim ummah, and he retools it, and he understands that this is not the moment for sure this free-floating poetry, but this is now a moment where Muslims need something to rejuvenate them, but need to be connected. So they have to be rooted in something, but there has to be, kullu jadidin ladid, as the Arabs say. Every new thing has some new sort of flavor to it. And I think for Iqbal, with that poem, he's reworking all the, 1,000 years, he's reworking the Arabic literary canon, he's reworking the Persian literary canon and the Urdu literary canon in one poem. And he's doing something, and the Shi'i literary canon too, the Marasiyas, the Marasiya Khani. And, and I think, the fact that he's actually putting political events in the poem of Seljuqs and, the Persians and the Iranians, etc. And I think it's a whole other 3 hour thing.
Was it considered blasphemous at the time?
I have heard this. I think this is just something to demonize Maulana. I went into the 1920 papers, into the newsletters. I went through 4,000 of his letters. I mean, if anybody shows me evidence, I'm willing to change my mind. Yeah. But it took me 6 months to go through 4,000 of his letters. And nowhere did he mention any of this. None of the akhbarat or the ikhbarat mentioned this in Lahore, Delhi, or Hyderabad. I think a liberal Pakistani or liberal Muslim wants to believe that this is blasphemous. But the reality is the ayah in the Quran of Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam on the 7th page, 6th line of Surah Yusuf. قال إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله وأعلم من الله ما لا تعلمون. قال إنما أشكو بثي وحزني. Sayyidina Yaqub is saying that, oh Allah, I am literally weeping to you. All of my, and I'm قال إنما أشكو شكا يشكو in Arabic literally means shikaya or shikwa, to complain. So this should not have been strange to anyone. No Maulana would have been stupid enough to not know this verse. So I think only this is just a caricature of the Maulana. Now I'm not justifying other Maulanas, but the reality is that, which is kind of beautiful, is that all Maulanas love Iqbal now, which is crazy.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So "Ay Khuda Shikwa Arbab Wafa bhi se sun le." Tell people a little bit about what these mean.
Repeat the line.
"Ay Khuda Shikwa Arbab Wafa se bhi sun le."
Yeah.
Ho gare humse thoda sa gila bhi sun le. So tell people what does that mean?
I think
the opening verses here. Translate them if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Hear God, the sad complaints of your ummah. What is it? Especially thinking about the situation in Gaza and the state of affairs of the ummah. How are these verses speaking to us today?
Yeah, I mean, so the line literally means that, oh Allah, from the Arbabi Wafa, literally the lords of loyalty, the people of loyalty. Oh Allah, we've been accustomed, like khugari hamd, literally means accustomed, istinasul hamd, to be accustomed to praise. Oh Allah, we've praised you so much. Let us complain to you now. Right? And I think like that tension of a human being, you also have to remember within the Urdu tradition of Majnoon. of Majnun and Layla, right? And that there's a lot of metaphysical import. We can't get into it now. But I think that this idea of that for a Muslim, they both praise their fate and they lament their fate, right? There's this back and forth. And I mean, truly, the Prophet ﷺ, during the Battle of Badr, what does he say in Sahih al-Bukhari? Allahumma in halaka hadha al-qawm lan tu'bad abada. Allahumma in halaka hadha al-qawm lan tu'bad abada. And I think this is a lament. Oh Allah, if my Sahaba are destroyed, you will never be worshipped ever. And there is a daringness to this, to the dua of the Prophet ﷺ.
And I think the sheer genius of Shikwa Jawab Shikwa is that, they say that the sign of genius is holding two contradictory thoughts in your mind and being able to live with them. And he goes through verse by verse in Shikwa and lays out his case against God in some ways. But then a few years later, as the Pakistani ulama like to say, he became Rahmatullah alayhi after Jawab Shikwa. But then he goes ahead and refutes his own points. And tell us a little bit about this one. So you said it earlier, Dil se jo baat nikalti hai asar rakhti hai, par nahi taqat parwaz magar rakhti hai.
Yeah, I mean, this is really drawing from Shihabuddin Suhrawardi, the great Muslim philosopher from Damascus. I mean, just the idea of how the heavens work, right? So you have this world, you have the malakut, you have the lahut, you have the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ilahi sa'adul kalim al-tayyibu, wa kadhalik yuri Ibrahim malakut as-samawati wal ard. All these different ayat, many philosophers created a whole system. And so for him, this idea was that, your du'as, your laments, they break the heavens. They can, the fact that dua changes your taqdeer is a hadith of the Holy Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. And I think for Iqbal, he's drawing on it in a really incredible way, because obviously, the next verses are saying, the angels are saying that, who is this verse? Sorry, I'm thinking in Persian now, but it's like what is it? Ahle zamin se koi, right? Like this is they're so shocked that a human being can sort of be complaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But yeah.
And then just to maybe conclude here, and then we can open it up to questions. But he says, koi qabil ho to hum shane kahi dete hain, dhoonne walon ko dunya bhi nahi dete hain, which we're sitting in the new world. So comment on that. What does this mean?
I think this is just a reflection from the hadith in Bukhari, where the Prophet says that whoever man masha ila Allahi ata ila Allahi harwa, or asra'a ilayhi harwala. This is a Bukhari hadith, that if you just seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah will come to you running. And I think that idea of seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the right place, and get from it, there's a lot of fatalism in the ummah at that time. A lot of people were saying, this world is over, Imam Mahdi is going to come, and he's going to fix everything, and we don't have to do anything. And we're just going to become doctors and engineers, and we'll make our bread, and inshallah, it will all become fine, and Imam Mahdi will come and save us all. But Iqbal was like, we have to do that work of, Ghazali is dead, Razi is dead, Ibn Taymiyyah is dead, Ibn Arabi is dead, radiyallahu anhum. But we have to go and do that point by point labor that they did. And that's why, Musalman ko Musalman kar diya tufani maghrib ne. Musalman ko Musalman. Sorry, another line. Bahar zamana atish Namrud wa bahar zamana sirr khalilas. In every era, there is the fire of Nimrud, but in every era, there is the secrets of Ibrahim alayhi salam.
I always thought when he said dunya nahi dete hain, he meant the new world. It was an homage to the new world, us here in America as well. Now, maybe we end here real quick. What is the legacy?
Ki Muhammad say.
Ki Muhammad. Well, I thought we could end there.
Okay.
We could end there.
Yeah.
Why does he matter today? Why does Iqbal matter? What is the relevance of Iqbal to somebody living in 2025? Houston, Texas. What is his relevance as a Muslim?
I was in Morocco over the summer. Ahmed was with me. I was studying, Arabic logic over there, and the only 20th century philosopher that they have Muslims read in Morocco is Muhammad Iqbal, a Punjabi boy, son of a hijab fabric maker. This is Allahu yakhtasu birah. Can you believe that? The only and because Iqbal truly in the 20th century is the only Muslim who did not resign from his tradition. There's many 20th century Muslim philosophers, but nobody was as educated as him with the tradition in both East and West. And still till this day, and this is the question, why has not a billion Muslims produced 52 Muslim countries another Muhammad Iqbal Qalandari Lahori? This is incredible. That why was that not the case? I think it's a crisis of education. It's a crisis of vision. It's a crisis of intellectual culture. It's a crisis of our past. It's a crisis of our future. The azamat and the sadamat that underlie the fact that we've been unable to produce someone like him. And I think he matters because it shows us that in modernity, in the aftermath of someone who is living I mean, none of us were born under colonial rule, I don't think. Right? None of us were born under colonial rule. He was born in the middle of that. Sialkot was the breadbasket of India. The British wanted Punjab more than anything else to give him the highest sort of export GDP. And for someone to be born in that era and to do the work that he did was to tie all of these traditions and canons. And we're not saying that everything he got was right, and that's okay. But nobody was brave enough and daring enough and intelligent enough to do and hardworking enough to do what he did. And we still 100 years later, 90 years, he died, 88 years ago, and we still have not produced anyone like him from Morocco to Malaysia. And this is an afa. This is something we need to reckon with. Producing Maulanas, thousands and thousands have not offered us anything. As someone who has spent 14 years in a Deobandi madrasa, I can tell you from the ulama from Azhar to Deoband to all of the Sufi madrasas have not offered anyone like Allama Iqbal, and there's no doubt about that. And because he was willing and daring to go and stare in the eyes of the Western canon and say that we are going to put Ghazali, Razi, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Arabi, and Shah Waliullah in dialogue with Hegel, Kant, Nietzsche, and we're going to ask new questions, and we're going to try to do something that nobody has ever done before. And because truly, the Prophet ﷺ said, wa alayhi salatu wassalam, that there will be a mujaddid in every ummah, and we don't know who it's going to be. We don't know if it was him. We hope that it was him. Wa shakar Allahu masa'yahu. But if it was him, he did that work and he did that labor, and nobody till this day, and I don't think, he said this line, and it's true that none of his Muslim forebears knew Aristotle as well as he did. Because he could read the Aristotle in the original translation. Muslims only had portions of Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. Iqbal had direct translations from the Greek into English when he was at Cambridge. So he had more knowledge of Aristotle and Plato than all of his predecessors. And he had to take on that burden by himself. Surud rafta baz ayat kana ayat, Nasim yaz Hijaz ayat kana ayat, Sar Ahmad Rozgari in Faqiri, Digar Danai Raz ayat kana ayat. He says that, will the old song of Islam ever come back again? Surud rafta, the song that has gone. Nasimi as Hijaz ayat kana ayat. Will the old breeze from Medina ever return? Sar Ahmad Rozgari in Faqiri, the time for this faqir has come to go. He wrote this in 1937. Sar Ahmad Rozgari in Faqiri, Digar Danai Raz ayat kana ayat. Will another keeper of secrets come again? Danai, the one who holds the secret. Digar Danai Raz ayat kana ayat. If we can just, the last reflection on the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, alayhi salatu wasalam, just want to share the story. Obviously, when he ends the poem with Ki Muhammad say wafatune to hum tere, and I don't think any line in Urdu ever captured that fire and that jazba and that shawq and that zoq and that parvaz and that ashuftagi and that shikufta, and we can go on. And I think that he's doing it in a time when Salafism has overtaken the Muslim world, when everybody has become obsessed with Ibn Taymiyyah, and everybody has diminished the role of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And for him to make that move when the fashion is to go to Ibn Taymiyyah and which I think is a misreading of Shaykh al-Islam, but for him is to make a statement that for any ascendancy in the Muslim intellectual tradition has to go through the shakhsiyah and the personality of the Holy Prophet. If I can end with an anecdote, was that when he was 8 years old in Sialkot, if you've ever been to his home, a beggar knocks on his door, and it's a beggar at 3 a.m. and he shoos him away, probably in Punjabi, kitte, I don't know, something, and dafa ho jao, and his father, Sheikh Muhammad Iqbal, which I just want him on the screen here for this, he asks him, who was that? He says, that was a beggar. He was bothering us at 8, 9 years old. And he tells him, "Usko wapas bola, call him back to the home." And so Iqbal goes in the streets at 3 a.m. in Sialkot, in British Sialkot, and he brings the beggar back. And Iqbal's father, wa rahimahullah, gives him some change. And then he says, subhanAllah, Darbul Masal Jumla, Hiratan Gaze Jumla, Sukhan Vari, Sukhan Aristagi, where he says that on the day of judgment, when we're all standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but especially in front as baruye Payghambar Khuda sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and all of our taqdeers are unveiled, beparda ho jayenge, they will all become unveiled. I don't want him to see that I turned away a beggar. And he said the hadith in Bukhari, ittaqun nara walau bi shiqqi tamra. that fear the fire, even if, or save yourself from the fire, even if it's from gajur ka tukra, from a piece of date. And then Iqbal said in Persian, Bapayan chura sad in alam pir. When this whole world, Bapayan, will come to an end. إذا انتهى هذا العالم, Bapayan chura sad in alam pir. كشفت بپرده هر پوشیده تقدیر. And all of our taqdeers will become unveiled. ما كن رسوا حضور خواجه ما را. Oh Allah, don't disgrace me in front of the Lord of prophets, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Zahisab man chashma un nihangir. That, oh Allah, if you were to punish me away from his eyes. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Questions? We have about 7 minutes till Isha comes in, so let's.
Question, but in the context of what he was discussing before, there is one poetry of Maulana Iqbal which says, "Khira na kar suka mujhe
Jalwa danish afrang
surma hai meri aankh ka."
khake Medina un Najaf. Wah. Which means that Europe's dazzling lights could never break me, for my eye has been stained with the surma of Medina and Najaf, where obviously Imam Ali alayhi salam is buried. Please.
Thank you very much for walking us through the hundreds of pages of centuries of history. If you could throw some light on again the poetry part of it was Shab Gureza Hogi Akhir Jalwa Kushi.
Wah.
Ye chaman mamool hoga nagma tawhid.
Wow. Yeah, I think so. The idea that like this naghma, this song will become renewed with the light of Tawheed. I think that for Iqbal, he saw that Tawheed took on a new libas, a new garb in every era that was very electric. And then in every era, with the Seljuks exploding into Central Asia, with the Ottomans besieging Vienna, where Wittgenstein and Mozart are living, it's for him, Iqbal is like, in every era, it was Allah's promise that Tawheed would electrify Muslims, but we needed to do the effort to regarb and reframe Tawheed, and that was our duty to show that Islam was ad-din al-ulya, or ad-din al-ghalib, ad-din al-ali, the highest religion and the highest ethical form of living in that world. And unless we didn't do that effort, nobody was going to do it for us. Yeah.
So generally we see Ghalib was really not recognized or given the reverence during his lifetime.
Absolutely.
And he got it later. What about Iqbal? Did he hold the same reverence and the recognition at the time he was alive as he holds today?
We know, I tried to go through the letters. It does seem he did become a sort of mini celebrity in his lifetime. Not as much as we have it now, but for sure, we know when he went to Hyderabad in 1931 with the Prime Minister, Sir Akbar Haydari, there were crowds waiting for him at the Malepali train station. So, which is so clearly there was some, and also in Bombay when he goes and visits. But it wasn't enough to. There weren't people funding him in that way, which is unfortunate. Other than Nizam of Hyderabad had given him a tanha, but that was it. Yeah. Yeah.
I think he read some history where he was much worried because he was being blamed by the ulama of that time for the Shikwa. And he was much worried. And later on, he was little given by comfort by some other scholar.
Interesting. Go ahead, please.
I'm really curious to know the event, the moment, or set of events which took you on this path.
I was in madrasa, in a Deobandi madrasa. I want to get to this picture really quickly. But I come from a second generation Hyderabadi family. Mother was born here. Grandparents came here in the 60s. This was my first uncle to come here, Hamid Mu'azzuddin Jilani. On the right, I'm sure many of you guys know Asad uncle who just passed away. We ask Allah to give him a for those. This is in Oklahoma State in 1967. So they came on a boat from Bombay, from Hyderabad to Bombay, and then to New York and Oklahoma. I did my hifz when I was 11. Came from an old guard Hyderabadi family that, part of Osmania. Both Asad uncle's father was a teacher of Iqbal, 1920s, 1970s. Went to Oxford in 1922, was for the first batch. So my great uncle's father, Asad uncle's father, were both at Osmania teaching in the 1930s, 1970s. I think I had heard about this. My family is a deeply Anglophile family, only spoke English at home. parents did not really care for Urdu. They just told us to sort of become doctors, lol, through my siblings did. But when I was 16, I realized that I wanted to go and become a Maulana because I was like, I had sort of seen other people do their thing. And when I was in Azadville, which is my madrasa in South Africa, I was in the bookstore Thursday after Asr. We only have one day off from Thursday until Friday after Maghrib. And I found a book. And in the book was those lines that I wanted to read you because it was the first lines of Iqbal. हर कोई मस्मे ज़ौक़तन आसानी है तुम मुसलमान हो क्या ये अंदाज़े मुसलमानी ने हैदर फ़क़्न दौलत उस्मानी है और तुम खार हुए तारिक क़ुरान होकर. And it's moved me so much that I went to because we're not allowed to have phones or laptops in our madrasa. We only that everyone is drunk on the pleasures of their own body. Are you Muslim? तुम में असलाफ से क्या निस्बत रूहानी है? You have no spiritual connection or intellectual connection with your ancestors. Obviously, we're a very sort of living in a colonized mentality. And I went to the internet cafe and I just printed out all of Shikwa and Jawabi Shikwa. And during my usul al-fiqh lessons, I would just memorize the poems because I felt so cheated that nobody had ever shown me these poems before. Me as a second generation American Muslim, that I felt cheated of my life, that we had been Muslims in America, had gone to Jummah khutbahs and halaqas and zawiyas and thousands of that in the Bay Area and all of this stuff and and nobody had recited this poem to me. And then I learned Persian, and I was like, if this was him in Urdu, and he wrote more in Persian, then I'm going to devote the next 8 years of my life to study Persian so I can read Iqbal bamimbar zad razi kanabayat guft, that Iqbal unveiled the secret on the member that he should have never said. Oh, I don't know. You would know it better. I don't know. Yeah. Sorry, can you take something from the yeah. Anybody?
Sorry, how did you
It's your time, I think. Yeah, sorry. Finish your question. We have 1 minute, please.
Persian?
Nothing from the Khawateen? Okay.
Duolingo? Do you do
Khawateen. Sorry, just let's yeah. I think language. I think like Iqbal is able to escape it because he studies Arabic and Persian. I think that like if you can access that, I think also as institutions we need to do a better job of just Quran, Tafsir, and Hadith have their place. I think that we need to expose Muslims to the whole breadth of the tradition. I mean, Islamic qawwali, art, architecture. We need to show. I mean, Iqbal actually gave a lecture in the 1920s at Aligarh on Umraniyat, which is architecture. And that's why they called him an Allama, because at that time there was no Muslim who had mastery over so many fields. Before the Allama was the Mufti in the madrasa, but now the Cambridge graduate is the Allama. They had never seen anybody who had ubur, as we would say, kafi ubur over so many different domains of knowledge. And I think that as Muslims, the madrasas no longer offer this. Muslims don't even teach history, let alone anything else, which is a tragedy. And as someone who spent so much of my life there, I feel like I should be able to say this. But I think it's very important that as Muslims, when we start maktabs, when we start like lives of Sahaba, very important. Sira, the most important thing in our life, there's no doubt. But that doesn't mean we neglect all of these other domains of knowledge that we have lost.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing your passion with us and the beautiful hour and a half we spent together. Jazakallah khair, everyone. And it's time for Isha. So thank you for joining us and make dua for us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا